This video shows my solution to day 11 of Advent of Code 2020, all done in Excel. If you want to check out Advent of Code, the link is in the description. Today's challenge is about seats in an airport. We're given a layout like this grid here, and we're given a set of rules. The rules tell us when people will avoid a seat, take a seat, or abandon a seat. The grid has a series of L's, dots and hashes. The dots represent the floor, so those are gaps between rows of seats. The L's are empty seats and hashes are occupied seats. We're told that people will only take a seat if no one is already in a seat next to it. We're also told that people will stay in a seat as long as there are fewer than 4 people sat next to them. As soon as there are 4 or more people sat next to them, they will leave that seat. The challenge itself is to run these rules and model how the people will enter and leave the seating area of the airport, and to keep running these rules until the seating stabilizes, that is, there's no change in the state of the seats. I will show you how I've approached this using the example layout here, and then I will show you it running with my actual input. So, over to Excel. Here is that input, the example input you saw a moment ago. I'm just going to pop it in here, so that's my initial state. What I've got is a current state and the next state. I've used some conditional formatting to show empty seats or available seats as green, occupied seats as red, and then nothing for empty spaces, the floor. What I have on the right hand side is a series of formulas which is taking the value here and then checking if it's occupied or not occupied, and checking how many adjacent seats are occupied or not occupied. It will then use that information to apply the rule. And so the formulas here actually give us the next state in the model. So if I just take this next state and I copy and paste it into the current state, we will then see the next iteration here. And as we go, we're going to see how many seats are occupied. So at the moment we have 71 occupied. We keep going until there is no longer a change. So this formula here is comparing the current state and the next state. As soon as it says true, we know to stop. So I'm just going to keep copy and pasting this until we get to that state, just to show you how it would run manually. We're getting closer. There we go. Now it says true. You can see the next state is the same as the current state, so there will be no more change, and therefore there is 37 occupied seats in that stable state. Now I've done the same thing but with my main input, and the main input is a lot larger, and so it takes a lot more space, and I'm not going to manually copy and paste this. Instead, I've written a very small amount of VBA code to run that for me. First, what I'm going to do is take the initial input and pop it in here. The one on the left hand side is going to be the current state. The one on the right hand side will then calculate the next state. And this is all set up in the exact same way, but with just a larger input. So I'm going to open up VBA. Alt F11 will do that for me, and here's the code I've written for part 1 of the challenge. So this is doing exactly what I just showed you, but it's automating it. So I've named my ranges here. This one here is called stable. You can see the name there, and the reason it's stable is because that's going to tell us true or false depending on whether the state is stable, i.e. is it changing or not. So we're going to check if that's true. If it's not true, we're going to copy the next state. So this state here is named next, and this one's named current. So we're going to take the next one and we're just going to copy the values into the current state. And it will repeat doing this until this value becomes true. So let me run that through. I'll put this to one side and press F5 to run the code. What I like about this one is it's very Game of Life-esque. You have this situation where the cells are either becoming red or green depending on the surrounding cells. And I also like how you can see that the space that is changing gets smaller and smaller. So a lot of the outside area has now stabilized, and we're just getting this space that is still having a lot of movement, but eventually will stop moving entirely. And I've chosen green and red because they're very Christmassy colours. Now we're approaching the end, and once it gets to the end and there's no more change, my loop will finish and the code will stop running, and we'll have our answer here. So my answer was 2277. Everyone's input is different, so this will not be the answer if you do the challenge yourself. Part 2 of the challenge changes the rules slightly. Now we are interested in the first visible seats rather than the ones immediately next to them. This means in each direction from every seat, up, down, left, right, and the 4 diagonals, we have to keep looking beyond floor spaces until we see a chair. And now we're also told that people will only abandon a seat if 5 or more of those 8 visible seats are occupied. And on the website they give us a few examples to describe this in a bit more detail. So we're now asked to do exactly the same thing, run the model with our inputs and keep running it until we reach a stable state. Once we've reached that point, we will answer how many seats are occupied. So I'm going to demonstrate how I approach this using first the example input and then my actual input. So I've done a very similar thing with the example input. I can just copy and paste the initial state into my current state, and then the conditional formatting is the same. And I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to take this input, put it here, and check if it's changed. But the formulas are all very different. So this time you can see all these boxes on the right hand side. These formulas here are telling me the first visible seat in the up and left direction. This is the bottom right direction, this is the down left direction, and this is the up right direction. I've also got the same for going to the right, to the left, up and down. So basically anywhere on here refers to a point in all of these, and it tells me what they can see in each direction. So if I actually change one here to occupied, you can see how this one and this one is now occupied. These are referring to this cell and this cell, and you can see for both of them the first seat they see in the up left direction is occupied. This one is immediately next to it, and this one is next to an empty space and then the occupied space. And then over here I've got a bunch of formulas which is basically combining every single one of these values for each seat. So here this is my top left seat, and this is telling me that I can see 3 empty seats from here. And let's check that. We've got 1, 2, 3. So that's correct. So what we'll do now is I'll just correct that to an L, and I'll show you how this would work manually before running the actual code. So it's exactly the same. It runs through. You can see all the boxes on the right hand side are changing as we go. So they're telling me what seats can see an occupied seat or an empty seat in each position. And with the example code, it doesn't have many iterations until we get to a stable state. And when we do, we can take our answer of how many seats are occupied. There we go. The state is now stable, and we can see how many occupied seats there are. My actual input I've put into another spreadsheet, which I'll open now. The reason I put it into a separate spreadsheet is because there's so many formulas that it just slows down a lot, so I wanted to keep it separate. So here is the spreadsheet with my main solution for part 2 in, and as you can see it's a very busy spreadsheet, and almost all of this is formulas and quite complex formulas. It's doing exactly the same thing as the example one, but just for a much bigger space. This is definitely not the most efficient way of solving this puzzle, but for some reason I decided to do it with formulas, and separating everything out was an interesting way of doing it. I'm not actually going to run the VBA code because it takes quite a while to run. It's identical to before, other than I have turned off screen updating before running the code just to speed things up a little. That's the end of this video. I hope you found it interesting, and do check out Advent of Code, it's really great fun. If you want a copy of this spreadsheet or any others, do drop me an email. Thanks for watching.